The patrol car's light bar painted the late afternoon air in slow pulses, blue, then red, then blue again, like a warning heartbeat. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, and the city looked softened at the edges, as if it, too, was tired of holding its breath. The black sedan eased to the curb with the obedient precision of someone used to rules, someone who knew exactly how easily a small mistake could become a big problem. Officer Dylan Markham stepped out of his cruiser and adjusted the weight of his belt like it was part of his spine. His partner, Officer Reyes, stayed behind the wheel, watching the surroundings the way trainers had taught them. Hands visible, eyes moving, never letting the moment become the kind of headline that followed you forever. Markham's boots hit the road with certainty. He'd been on the force 9 years and had learned to move like he belonged everywhere. The traffic stop wasn't dramatic. No screeching tires, no shouting. But he liked it that way. Dramatic meant unpredictable. Dramatic meant paperwork. The sedan's windows were tinted, but within the legal limit, barely. A slim, elegant shape sat behind the wheel, posture straight, hands placed deliberately at 10 and 2. Markham approached from the driver's side, one hand resting near his holster-out habit. The other held a small notepad. "Evening," he said, voice neutral. "License and registration, please." The driver turned her head slightly. The glass came down with a smooth hum. The woman's face was calm, deep brown skin, hair pulled back neatly, no jewelry except a small watch that looked more expensive than Markham's monthly rent. Her eyes were steady and sharp in a way that made him feel like he'd been measured before he even spoke. "Good afternoon, officer," she replied. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Markham gave the practiced answer. "We got a call about a vehicle matching this description. You mind providing your license and registration?" Her gaze didn't change. A call? About what? He glanced at the plate, then back at her. "Stolen car. Same make, same model, same color. We just need to verify." Something about her expression tightened. Not fear, not surprise, but a weariness that was familiar to anyone who had lived long enough in this city. The kind of fatigue that lived behind polite words. She reached slowly into her purse, slow enough that it looked like a demonstration, pulled out a wallet, and offered him a driver's license. Markham took it, eyes flicking over the name. Han, Adrian J. Whitaker. Below it, in smaller type, Circuit Court Judge. He didn't react outwardly, but something inside him bristled. People flashed fancy titles all the time. Doctors, lawyers, business owners. They thought it made them immune. He looked up at her. "Judge, huh?" "Yes," she said simply. "And this is your vehicle?" "It is." Markham didn't hand the license back. "Registration." She kept her hands visible as she reached into the glove compartment, opened it carefully, and placed the registration on the dashboard instead of handing it over. Another small, deliberate act. Markham read it. The name matched. The VIN matched the one printed on the document. Still, his jaw tightened. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Officer Reyes leaned forward slightly in the patrol car, eyebrows lifting. It was a silent question. "Why?" Judge Whitaker paused. "On what grounds?" Markham felt heat rise behind his ears. "For my safety and yours." "Step out." She took a slow breath. "Officer, I have complied. You have my license and registration. If you're verifying a report, you can do that without removing me from my car." Markham's confidence, built on years of being obeyed, didn't like resistance. He took a half step closer. "Ma'am," he said, letting the words sharpen. "I said step out." The air between them grew dense. The city's sounds seemed to fade, the distant horn, the hiss of passing tires, until there was just the pulse of the light bar and the quiet certainty in her eyes. Judge Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She did something worse, at least for Markham. She reached into her purse again with the same deliberate slowness, withdrew a second card, and held it up so it caught the light. It wasn't a badge like his. It wasn't flashy, but it carried the weight of an entire system. Circuit Court Identification, the Honorable Adrian J. Whitaker, presiding judge. Then she said, calmly, "Officer Markham, before you decide what kind of stop this is going to be, I want you to look at me and understand I know the law as well as you do. Possibly better." Markham froze. "How do you?" You're wearing your name, she replied, eyes flicking briefly to the stitch tag on his uniform. And you announced it into your body camera at the beginning of this stop. That's policy. Reyes's posture shifted in the cruiser. He wasn't smiling, but his mouth twitched like someone witnessing a slow-motion fall and not sure whether to intervene. Markham swallowed. He'd forgotten the body camera was rolling, because he always forgot it when he felt in control. Judge Whitaker continued, voice even. You said you were verifying a report. That's fine. Do it. But ordering me out of my vehicle without articulable suspicion beyond a generalized call, after confirming my registration matches, won't look like procedure. It will look like something else. He heard it then. The faint click of Reyes's dash cam whirring as it recorded. The subtle, omnipresent hiss of the body camera's microphone capturing every breath. Markham's pride flared. Are you implying I'm doing something wrong? I'm implying you should be careful, she said, because you're being recorded, and I'm going to ask, politely, for your supervisor. Markham stared at her, as though waiting for the universe to rearrange itself into the usual order where his voice ended conversations. But nothing moved except the light. Supervisor, he repeated, disbelief sliding into anger. Yes, Judge Whitaker said. Now. He stepped back, hand still holding her license and registration like he could keep them hostage. Then he turned and walked to the cruiser, shoulders stiff. Reyes rolled down his window. What's going on? Reyes asked quietly. Markham stopped himself. Saying it out loud would make it real. Just call Sergeant Lang. Reyes watched him for a long beat. You sure? Everything matches. Call him. Reyes pressed the radio button. Dispatch, Unit 12. Requesting supervisor to our location for verification. Markham stood by the cruiser, staring at the sedan, feeling something sour churn in his stomach. He thought would be routine. Quick check. Quick release. A reminder that the city wasn't hers to drive through unobserved. But she'd looked at him like he was the one being evaluated. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Lang arrived in an unmarked SUV, stepping out with the slow, heavy calm of someone who'd learned to absorb other people's chaos. What's the issue? Lang asked, eyes moving from Markham to the sedan to Reyes. Markham spoke fast. Stolen vehicle call. She matched. She's refusing to step out. Judge Whitaker remained seated, hands visible, posture unchanged. Lang walked to the sedan, leaned slightly, so his face was in view. Good afternoon, Judge Whitaker, he said, and there was respect in his tone that made Markham's teeth grind. Good afternoon, Sergeant, she replied. Lang nodded. I apologize for the inconvenience. We received a report. Turns out the caller misread a plate. Dispatch confirms it's not your vehicle. You're free to go. Thank you, she said. Before I do, Sergeant, I'd like a copy of the incident number for this stop. Lang's eyes flicked to Markham. Of course. Markham felt his throat tighten. Judge Whitaker added gently. And I'd like to confirm, my license and registration will be returned to me now. Lang held his hand out toward Markham without looking at him. Officer. Markham handed them over, fingers stiff. Judge Whitaker accepted them calmly, then looked directly into Markham's eyes with something that wasn't triumph. Exactly. It was clarity. Officer Markham, she said, I'm going to go home now. You're going to go back to work. But this stop will not simply vanish because you'd like it to. Markham forced a tight smile. Have a nice day, Your Honor. She paused, then said, I intend to. The sedan pulled away smoothly, disappearing into traffic like a stone slipping beneath water. For a moment, Markham stood in the heat, watching the space it left behind, as if the road itself had accused him. Reyes exhaled. Sergeant Lang stared at Markham. What did you do? Lang asked quietly. Markham bristled. Nothing. I did my job. Lang's voice stayed low. Your job is not to create a problem and then act surprised when it becomes one. Get in the cruiser. That night, Judge Whitaker sat at her dining table, the city's glow seeping through her kitchen window. The table held her laptop, a cup of tea gone lukewarm, and a small stack of court filings she hadn't touched. Across from her sat her sister, Naomi, who had always been able to read Adrienne's silence. You're quiet, Naomi said. Adrienne's hands were wrapped around the cup. I got pulled over. Naomi's face shifted. Are you okay? Yes, Adrian replied. I'm fine. That's not the question. Adrian smiled faintly, without humor. I'm tired. Naomi leaned forward. Did you file a complaint? Adrian exhaled. Not yet. Naomi's eyes hardened. Why not? Adrian stared at her tea. Because complaints become stories. Stories become debates. And debates become distractions from the point, which is always the same. I should have been able to drive home without being treated like a suspect in my own city. Naomi tapped the table softly. You're a judge. Adrian looked up. That's exactly why I can't pretend this is nothing. After a moment, she reached for her laptop. She didn't write an angry essay. She didn't post a video. She didn't call a reporter. She did what she'd spent her career doing. She documented. Time, location, badge number, patrol unit, the exact words spoken. And then she did something that made her pause, fingers hovering above the keyboard. She attached the line that was both shield and sword. This stop was recorded on the officer's body camera and the patrol vehicle's dash camera. She sent the complaint to Internal Affairs, copied the department's professional standards unit, and, after a long moment of stillness, copied the city's civilian review board. Then she shut the laptop. Naomi exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for Adrian. Good. Adrian leaned back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of her home. She'd ended the stop on the spot. The career-ending part? That would be decided by everything that happened after. 2 days later, Officer Markham sat in a small room with bland walls and a table that looked like it had been assembled by someone who didn't care whether it wobbled. Across from him sat Lieutenant Harris from Internal Affairs and a civilian board observer with a notebook. A laptop was open between them, paused on a frame of Judge Whitaker's face caught in the body camera's wide-angle view. Markham's palms were damp. Harris's expression was flat. We'll start with a few questions. Then we'll watch the footage together. Understood. Markham nodded. Harris clicked a pen. Why did you initiate the stop? Call came in, Markham said. Stolen vehicle. Matching description. Harris's eyes didn't move. Dispatch notes indicate the call described a black sedan with tinted windows in a city full of black sedans with tinted windows. Was there anything else? Markham swallowed. No, but the call came from a business owner on Pierce. Said it looked suspicious. The civilian observer wrote something down. Harris continued. After you reviewed registration that matched the driver, why did you order her out of the vehicle? Markham's mouth went dry. Standard procedure. Harris tilted his head slightly. Standard procedure is not a legal justification. What was your articulable reason? Markham's heartbeat thudded in his ears. For officer safety. Harris leaned back. Officer safety is not a magic phrase. What specific behavior made you feel unsafe? Markham hesitated. Harris clicked the laptop. The video played. Markham watched himself approach. Heard his own voice. Heard Judge Whitaker ask why she'd been stopped. He watched the moment his tone sharpened, saw the angle of his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his weapon. He watched himself say, step out of the vehicle. The room felt smaller with every second. Then Judge Whitaker's card flashed in the frame. Simple, official, undeniable. Harris paused the video and looked at Markham. Officer, Harris said quietly, do you understand how this looks? Markham's jaw tightened. She was being difficult. The civilian observer's pen stopped. Harris's eyes hardened. She was being lawful. She asked questions. She complied. And you escalated. Markham felt anger rise again, defensive and desperate. She played the judge card. Harris's voice stayed calm. She's a judge. She did not play anything. She identified herself in response to an escalation you created. Markham stared at the paused image on the laptop. Judge Whitaker's face captured mid-sentence. Calm, steady, unimpressed. Harris folded his hands. We have another issue. Markham blinked. What? Harris tapped a folder. Your stop history. Your use of force reports. The pattern of complaints. Markham's stomach dropped. Harris continued, voice even. This complaint didn't come out of nowhere. It came with context. Markham tried to speak, but his throat was tight. The civilian observer finally looked up. Officer Markham, have you ever completed additional bias training outside of the required modules? Markham snapped. I'm not biased. Harris didn't flinch. No one sits in this room thinking they are. The question was, have you pursued training? Markham's silence answered. Harris clicked the laptop again. The video continued. Judge Whitaker's voice filled the room. You're being recorded, and I'm going to ask, politely, for your supervisor. The words weren't loud. They were lethal. Harris paused again. She did not yell. She did not threaten. She did not resist. She simply made your choices visible. Do you understand? Markham swallowed, and for the first time in his career, he felt what it was to be on the other side of authority. He tried to cling to pride, but pride was brittle here. Yes, he said, barely audible. Harris's expression didn't soften. You are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending final review. Markham blinked. What? You can't. Harris's tone remained controlled. We can, and we are. Markham stood abruptly, chair scraping. Because she's a judge. Harris looked up at him, unimpressed. Because she's a person. And because we have video of you escalating a stop without legal grounds. Sit down, officer. Markham's face burned, but he sat. The civilian observer wrote again, slow, deliberate strokes. Markham stared at the paused image of Judge Whitaker's face on the screen. He thought her flashing that ID was about power. He hadn't understood it was about accountability. In the following weeks, the department did what it always did when exposed. It tightened its tie and tried to look presentable. Press statements. We take these allegations seriously. Meetings. We are committed to community trust. But the footage existed, and footage was stubborn. It leaked, not from the judge, not from the board, but from someone inside the department who'd been tired of watching the same thing happen and then disappear into paperwork. It appeared online without commentary, without dramatic music, just a raw clip of a traffic stop in late afternoon light. People watched it in break rooms and on buses. They watched it at night in bed, the glow of their screens reflecting in eyes that had seen their own versions of the moment. Some saw a cop doing his job. Others saw the familiar shape of suspicion. Most saw something else, a woman who did not beg for dignity. She simply claimed it. The city reacted the way cities do, loudly, messily. A small group protested outside precinct headquarters. A larger group argued in comment sections. A council member demanded a hearing. The mayor asked for calm, in a tone that sounded like someone hoping the storm would pass around them. Judge Whitaker did not go on television. She went to work. From the bench, she watched officers testify in front of her every day, sometimes honest, sometimes evasive, sometimes frightened. She listened to prosecutors and defense attorneys wrangle over facts like they were pieces of a broken mirror. And the whole time, she was aware of the strange duality, how power looked from the outside and how fragile it felt from within. One morning, after court recessed, her clerk, a young man named Julian, approached her chambers with a careful expression. Your Honor, he said, there's a request from the Public Safety Committee. They'd like you to speak at the hearing next week. Adrian set down her pen. They want a judge to testify about policing. Julian nodded. They want you. Adrienne's eyes narrowed slightly. Because I was pulled over. Julian didn't deny it. Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a brief moment, like she was measuring the weight of the ask. Send a response, she said finally. I will attend, but I will not discuss active cases. And I will not allow my presence to become theater. Julian swallowed. Understood. After he left, Adrian sat alone, listening to the distant hum of the courthouse. She thought of Markham's face when she'd held up her ID, how his certainty had cracked. She didn't rejoice in that. What she wanted wasn't to ruin one man. It was to prevent the next stop from ending differently for someone without a title, without a card, without a calm voice practiced over decades. But systems didn't change because one person wanted them to. They changed because someone forced them to look at themselves. The hearing room at City Hall was full in a way that felt both hopeful and dangerous. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters murmured. Citizens filled seats and stood along the edges. Officers in uniform were scattered throughout like anchors. Councilwoman Anita Price, chair of the Public Safety Committee, banged her gavel lightly. We are here to address concerns about traffic stops, escalation, and community trust, she said. We will hear testimony from the police department, the Civilian Review Board, and members of the public. We will also hear from the Honorable Judge Adrian Whitaker. Adrian sat at the witness table, hands folded, face composed. She could feel eyes on her, some supportive, some resentful, some merely curious. She wasn't naive about what she represented in that room. A black woman in a position some people believed should belong to someone else. Always someone else. Councilwoman Price nodded toward her. Judge Whitaker, thank you for coming. Please share your account. Adrian adjusted the microphone slightly. My account is simple, she began. Her voice carried without strain, steady as a gavel strike. I was stopped for driving a vehicle described as possibly stolen based on a vague call. I provided identification and registration. The officer confirmed the information matched. He then ordered me out of the vehicle without articulable cause. I requested a supervisor. The supervisor arrived and ended the stop. She paused. I do not believe my experience is unique. I believe what is unique is that my stop was recorded, and that I had the authority, knowledge, and perceived legitimacy to insist on de-escalation. A murmur rippled through the room. Adrian continued. I'm a judge. My job is to evaluate facts, apply law, and protect due process. I am not here to shame the department. I am here to make a point. In a lawful society, dignity should not be granted based on profession, race, or calmness under pressure. Councilman Dorsey, a man with a tight jaw and the kind of skepticism that leaned forward like a weapon, cleared his throat. Judge, he said. With respect, the officer had reason to be cautious. Police work is dangerous. Adrian turned her gaze to him, calm and unwavering. It is. And caution is not the same as suspicion. Officer safety is vital. So, is citizen safety. The law requires that when an officer escalates a stop, by removing a driver, by detaining them longer than necessary, there must be a reason that can be articulated beyond discomfort. She held his eyes, and if an officer cannot articulate that reason, then the escalation becomes something else. Dorsey frowned. Are you accusing the officer of racism? Adrian didn't flinch. I am describing a pattern in which black citizens are perceived as suspicious in situations where others are not. Whether an officer's heart contains malice is not the only question. Outcomes matter. Patterns matter. Accountability matters. The room went quiet in the way that made microphones feel too loud. Councilwoman Price leaned forward. Judge Whitaker, what would you recommend? Adrian exhaled slowly. First, data. Every stop should be documented with clear reasons for initiation and escalation. Second, consequences. Not reassignments, not quiet retirements. Real consequences for repeated escalation without cause. Third, training that is not a checkbox, but a practice, repeated and measured. She paused again, letting the words settle. And fourth, she said, a culture shift. Officers should be taught that being questioned is not an insult. It is a citizen's right. In the back of the room, an officer shifted his posture. Adrian noticed, and her gaze softened slightly, not in apology, but in humanity. I know there are officers who do their work with integrity, she said. This is not about destroying them. It is about removing those who treat power as permission. Councilwoman Price nodded slowly. Thank you, Judge. Adrian sat back, hands folding again. Cameras clicked like insects. The week after the hearing, the department announced Officer Markham's termination. The official statement was careful. Violations of protocol. Escalation without cause. Prior complaints substantiated after review. Failure to follow de-escalation standards. Conduct unbecoming. In the break room at the precinct, Reyes stared at the bulletin on the wall like it was a ghost. Sergeant Lang stood behind him, arms crossed. Reyes spoke quietly. He's done. Lang nodded. He did it to himself. Reyes swallowed. He kept saying it was because she's a judge. Lang's eyes narrowed. That's the story he needed. That way he didn't have to look at the real reason. Reyes didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, What's the real reason? Lang's voice was low, because he thought the badge meant he could decide who deserved respect. Reyes leaned back against the counter, tired. Outside, the city moved on, but it moved differently now, like someone who'd learned to check their surroundings with new awareness. On a quiet Saturday morning, Adrian stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner of Maple and 3rd. The line was short. The barista smiled. The scent of espresso and warm pastries wrapped around her like something kind. She reached the counter, ordered her usual, and stepped aside to wait. A woman behind her, mid-30s, hair in a scarf, toddler perched on her hip, hesitated, then said softly, "Excuse me." Adrian turned. "Yes." The woman's eyes were bright, with something between gratitude and pain. "I saw the video," she said, "and the hearing. I wanted to say thank you." Adrian's throat tightened unexpectedly. "For what?" Adrian asked gently, though she already knew. "For not letting it slide," the woman said. "My brother got pulled out of his car last year. He didn't do anything wrong, but he got scared and raised his voice, and she stopped, swallowing hard. They said he was resisting." Adrian nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." The woman shifted her toddler. "When I saw you, how calm you were, it made me realize it shouldn't require calm to be treated like a human." Adrian held her gaze. "You're right," she said. The woman's eyes filled slightly. "I hope it changes." Adrian inhaled and let the breath steady her. "So do I," she replied. "And it won't change all at once. But sometimes it changes because someone refuses to pretend." The woman nodded, wiping at her cheek with the back of her hand. Adrienne's coffee was called. She took it and turned, but paused before leaving. "Hey," she said to the woman. The woman looked up. Adrienne's voice was quiet but firm. "Tell your brother he wasn't wrong to be afraid. And tell him his fear doesn't make him guilty." The woman's mouth trembled into a small, grateful smile. "I will." Adrian stepped out into the morning light, coffee warm in her hand. The street was ordinary. Cars passing, someone walking a dog, sunlight catching on windows. But it felt different to her now, not because the city had suddenly become safe, but because a line had been drawn in public where it used to be drawn only in whispers. She walked to her car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. She thought about Markham, not as a villain in a story, but as a man shaped by a culture that told him control was the same as competence. She thought about the officers who would learn from his fall and the ones who would resent it. She thought about the people who would watch the footage and see, for the first time, a different ending. Then she started the car. As she pulled into traffic, the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the city like a promise that didn't come easy. And Adrian drove on. Not because she believed the road would always be fair, but because she refused to accept a world where the only way to be safe was to be silent. Sometimes, ending a career wasn't about revenge. Sometimes, it was about drawing a boundary so clear that the next person didn't have to flash anything at all to be treated like they belonged.